Okay. Gary, what did you bring in with you? Look at here. My goodness.
It was a flower. I gave a bowl.
Okay, has everybody got an outline? If you don't, we have some up here. Oh, okay. Okay. You got me turned on now? Thank you. Okay. I did my part. Okay, we're continuing our study in the life of Christ. Last week, Gary did not finish, and so he did all but his last slide, so I'm going to quickly go over that, and then we're going to get right into our lesson. So you won't see it on your outline. But he ended, I guess, basically in verse 9 of chapter 18 in Matthew 18 and verse 9. So I'm going to read Matthew 18, verses 10 through 14, and then make some comments on that. Matter of fact, I'm not going to make any comments. I'm going to let McGarvey speak because I like what he said about those few verses, and then we'll get into our lesson. The last time I was up here, pollen was in the air, so hopefully things are better. Let's read that real quickly here. Matthew 18, verses 10 through 14. Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep, and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountain to seek the one that is straying? And if you should find it, I say to you, he rejoices more over that one sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. So, the verse 10 there, he uses the word little ones. That little ones are basically his disciples. That's what he's talking about. But McGarvey says this about verses 11 through 14. He says, those who have led highly moral lives have a tendency to despise those who have been defiled by gross sin. This truth is abundantly illustrated by the conduct of the Pharisees. Moreover, the anxiety and trouble caused by the sheep's wandering do not depreciate, but rather enhance the values of that sheep, because the heart of the shepherd is to replete with goodness, that the misbehavior of the sheep prompts him to feel feel pity and compassion, rather than to cherish resentment and revenge. Now, as we go into this study here, you're going to see how this completely does a perfect segue, if you know what a segue is, a segue right into the lesson that we're going to be talking about this morning, and that is a brother who sins, and that's what we're going to be talking about here in verses 15 through 35. So, Jesus' final sermons was triggered by an argument among the disciples. That's in verses 1 through Matthew 18, verses 1 through 5. And their argument was who would be the greatest in the kingdom. So the first part of Jesus' response had to do with being childlike. Then the second part focused on getting along with others. So, and the focus there was on humility. Matthew 18 and verse 6 says, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin or stumble, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and he was drowned in the depths of the sea. Well, an ancient mode of punishment for certain crimes was to hang a stone around the victim's or the criminal's neck and throw him into the sea. Well, this was done by the Syrians and the Greeks, and also the Jews did this. There were two kinds of millstones, and I think Gary touched on this a little bit last week. If he didn't, we're going to do it this morning. There's two different kinds of millstones. One that a woman could actually hold in her hand and use it to grind up grain. There would be a small stone. And then there was a larger stone that was done by an oxen. And you've probably seen scenes of an oxen pulling a millstone around and grinding up grain. It would be a kind of a mass quantity at that time. So the thought here is for us to remember that this punishment shows the seriousness of the offense. So now he wanted to look at the other side of this question. Well, what if his believers were sinned against? So in Matthew 18 and verse 15, he says, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. So take into consideration of what we just read, just about the value of the little ones and what we just read and made the comments about going out and capturing the lost sheep, the one lost sheep, and compared to the 99. So the thought here is that any time a brother is involved in sin that can affect his soul's salvation and perhaps the souls of others, each person has the responsibilities to go to the sinner, listen to this, in love and sort things out. It's possible that he does not even realize what he has done. So we should go to him to win the argument and to talk to him to see if we could come to some kind of compromise and a better understanding. So we're talking about winning that brother or sister back into Christ, but it's possible to win the argument and lose that person. It's very possible. It happens all the time. So we must not lose our focus on how we're handling that situation. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus explained what a Christian should do if he knows a brother who has sinned against him. So let's go over to Matthew 5 in verse 23 and 24. And this is on the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and bring your offer to your gift to the altar. So, having a clear mind and a clear conscience would be the thought here in a situation like that. So here Jesus was discussing what a Christian should do if he has something against a brother. He is to go to him. If both parties in a dispute act like Christians, they will go and meet each other somewhere in the middle and talk and discuss and come to some kind of reconciliation. So if one of the parties does not do what he should do, that does not excuse the other. Whether a person is the offended or the offender, he has to go to that person and try to work it out. The latter part of Matthew 18 and verse 15 says, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. One version of the scripture has that word, instead of alone, has the word private. Privately is the thought here. So it's very important when someone does something that hurts a Christian, he should not go and tell everybody, all of his friends and neighbors. A comment that was made by a fellow by the name of Gail Oler, and I got this out of Roper's commentary. He was a superintendent of a children's home. He says this. He said, before you complain to your husband or wife, your friends or your relatives, the elders or the preacher, or even your dog, you should go to the individual. So if we ignore Christ's instructions to resolve the issue, but choose to tell everyone about how mad this makes us, in most cases it will cause people to take sides. This, in effect, can cause division and will destroy the church. You know, we see scenes on television of the wildfires here and out in the West, and just a little spark can just destroy just acres and acres of land and forest. It can spread like a wildfire. You see, if we have the right attitude when we go to a brother who has sinned against us, we should be able to work through the problem. Paul faces this issue in Galatians 6 and verse 1, where his brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. See, we could also fall into what that person is being talked to about. This word restore here is a Greek medical word that means to set a broken bone. If you set a broken bone back and put it back together and kind of join it back together when it's broken, it will grow back. It will be restored. My brother fell out of one of the steps of the house that we were living in back when he was real young and everything, back in those days, and that was probably in the 40s. So when he went to the doctor did not really set the bone real good. So this is about as far as he could straighten out his arm. Instead of being like this is about as far as so it was not repaired and restored correctly. So Bowles' commentary expresses it this way. He says, the one that has received the wrong must use all the agencies of righteousness at his command to bring the erring one to a state of repentance so that he may be forgiven. As much as we find the Old Testament book of Leviticus boring when you read through it, there's a lot of wisdom there. Over in chapter 19 and verse 17, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. See, we could fall into that pit also if we handle that situation the wrong way. So that's the fault here. Hatred, as we all know, will destroy your relationship with others, and it'll destroy your relationship with God, and we don't want that to happen. So we must not go about condemning the offender or spreading gossip. We must lovingly seek him in the same way we would want him to help us if the situation were reversed. Did you hear that word, lovingly? When you go to someone, don't jump on him like a wildcat or something. Go to him and have a decent, civilized conversation with that person. So what do we do next? Verse 16, but if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word will be established. The need for 2 or 3 witnesses is emphasized in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Over in Deuteronomy 19 and verse 15, the writer says, one witness shall not arise against a man concerning any inquiry or any sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 1, Paul writes, this will be the 3rd time I'm coming to you. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. So, notice the last 4 words of Deuteronomy 19, which would be, a matter shall be established. And then the last 4 words of 2 Corinthians is, word shall be established. So basically what we're looking at and what we're trying to find is we're trying to get all the facts before you make a decision, okay? You can't make a good decision unless you've got all the facts. So if the offender refuses to make things right, we may feel that the need to share the burden with 1 or 2 more dependable believers. So we should share the facts as we see them and ask the brethren for their prayerful consideration or prayerful counsel. And this is very important, to pray about a situation like this. After all, when we talk to these other folks and everything, we may find out that, hey, Ron, you're wrong. You may not have everything just right. So if the brethren feel the cause is right, then together we can go to the offender and try once again to win him or gain him back. So not only can these men assist in prayer and persuasion, but they can be witnesses to the church, to the truth of the conversation. Very important. When sin is not dealt with honestly, guess what happens? It always spreads. What once was a matter between 2 people has now grown to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or a half of a congregation. So we must do this the right way. Well, what if taking others does not produce the desired results? In verse 17 he says, and if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Wow. Notice that here Christ uses the word church. 2 chapters earlier, he promised to build his church over in Matthew 16 and verse 18. So now he pictured the church as a body of people authorized by the Lord to include or exclude individuals from their fellowship if we do it right. You got to do it right. Everything has to be in order. Jesus did not specify how we tell the church, but we just have to do it in a civilized manner. It's more likely that the information would be shared in a special meeting of the members rather than during a public worship assembly, when I think that's been done here. So remember, our goal is not the winning of a case, but the winning of a brother in Christ. The word gained here, used in Matthew 18 and verse 15, win or gain, whichever one you choose to use. You may want to use win, you may want to use gain. Is used also in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 22. And let's go over there quickly. I should have had this marked. 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 22. Okay. This is Paul talking. He says, listen to the frame of mind that Paul is in here. And I think this is important to remember. Paul reminds us in Philippians 2 that we need to have the mind of Christ. We need to have the mind of someone who is righteous and seeking that which is righteous. He says, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without the law toward God, but under the law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partakers of it with you. I've also, in your outline there, given you some other scriptures in 2 Corinthians and Romans. We have time later, we may read those. You see, other scriptures make it clear that the purpose of this action is not primarily punitive, but rather to bring the individual to his senses and to restore him to the Lord. Discipline carried out in the right spirit is not an expression of hatred, but of love and concern. Did you hear that? Discipline carried out in the right spirit is not an expression of hatred. Please understand this, okay? But of love and concern. Remember what Christ said about the one sheep and how he did it. It's important. Disciplining of a child is never pleasant, and disciplining a brother and sister in Christ is never a happy occasion. Jesus knew that. So, to encourage his brethren, he assured them that if a congregation carried out these instructions, God would be with them. Verses 18 through 20. Follow along with me. This is in chapter 18. For surely I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of you. See, the promise here in verse 19 is the same as the one made earlier to Peter in the latter part of chapter 16 in verse 19 of Matthew, where he said, "And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So since Christ was speaking directly to the apostles in chapter 18 and verse 19, most commentators consider this promise to be primarily to them. So since the context is the subject of church discipline, a general application can be made to congregational action. If a congregation binds as heaven has bound, that is, does only what heaven has authorized, then their action is, guess what? God-pleasing. And that's our goal. So this verse should not be taken as an unqualified promise that two Christians can ask for anything that they want and God will give them what they... Remember John said over in 1 John 5 and verse 14, he said, "Now this is the confidence that we have in Him, Christ. If we ask anything according to His will, He hears us." Verse 20 is a familiar scripture to us. In verse 20, he says, "For where two or three gather together in my name, I am there in the midst of them." But remember that Christ was referring to two or three coming together in His name to exercise church discipline. So, Jesus' teaching about going to a sinful brother prompted Peter to wonder how often he should forgive such a brother. Does this surprise us about Peter? Not really. Then Peter, this is in verse 21 of Matthew 18. Then Peter came to him and said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" Well, Peter probably thought he was being generous here. The rabbis only require 3 times. So he must have caught him off guard when Christ said this in verse 22. He said, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. In other words, forgiveness should have no limits. So the Lord then related the parable of the unmerciful servant, in which a servant who, having been forgiven a great debt, refused a fellow servant an almost worthless amount. So I think we pretty well know that story. If we have time, we'll go back and read it. But the teachings of Matthew 18, verses 15 through 35, leaves us with 2 principles here. When one of us has something against a brother, instead of complaining to everybody else, he should go to that person. Number 2, we are not to hold grudges, but be ready to forgive. Okay. Now, is there any questions or any thoughts? Because now we're going to go over to Luke 9, verses 51 through 62, and also in John 7, verses 2 through 10. Okay. Okay, John 7. John 7. Let's read verses 2 through 10, and then we'll make some comments on that. Okay. Now the Jews' feast, let's go just start chapter 1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk into Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of the Tabernacle was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you're doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For even his brothers did not believe in him. Then Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to this feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come." And when he had said these things, to them, he remained in Galilee. So Matthew 19 and verse 1 says that when Jesus had finished these words, and this was his final discourse in Galilee, by the way, he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea. So Jesus had conducted an earlier Judean ministry. We talked about that several weeks ago. It ended with when John the Baptist was put in prison. You all remember that. So from Judea, he moved north to Galilee. So John wrote that he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. This is in John 7 and verse 1. So he had some good memories in Galilee. But now the time had come for him to return to the scene of his earlier ministry to Judea in general, basically Jerusalem. So, this new phase of Christ's ministry began with a trip to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Tabernacles, or Feast of Booths, whichever one you want to say. I like to use the Feast of the Tabernacles. So this feast was one of the three major feasts of the Jews. Now, if you want to go back to Leviticus and read about the feast of this feast here, it's over in Leviticus 23, verses 39 through 43. So it was celebrated in late September or early October. As the time of the feast drew near, Jesus' half-brothers urged him to go to the celebration. Remember, we just read that. So his disciples in Judea could see the kind of miracles he had done in Galilee. So these were half-brothers because Jesus and their mother had the same mother, Mary. But they did not have the same father, Jesus. Jesus' father was God. So their father was Joseph. So we can find his half-brothers mentioned also in Matthew 13, verse 55, and Mark 6 and verse 3. Both of these books mention their names. So according to John 7 and verse 5, these brothers did not believe in him. So Christ then said in verses 6, 7, and 8, let's read that again. He says, then Jesus said to them, my time is not yet come. Use that little word, three-letter word, yet. But your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to this feast. I'm not yet going up to this feast, for my time has not fully come. So Christ said that there would be no problem in their going to Jerusalem, since they were not on the Jewish' most wanted list. But it would be dangerous for him to go. So when the caravan left for Jerusalem, he and his disciples did not travel with the others, according to John 7 and verse 9. Later they did go and quietly to the feast in verse 10. So since Jesus ultimately went to the festival, his words in verse 8 are interesting, I think. He says, you go up to the feast, and I am not yet going to the feast, for my time is not fully come. Some commentators suggest that Jesus said that he would not go, but then changed his mind and went. And this would be inconsistent with the character of Jesus and his agenda. Over in Luke 9 and verse 51. Now it came to pass when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. Okay? So, this might be misconstrued to mean that Jesus was not altogether truthful. Well, John 7 and verse 18 said, he who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who seeks the glory of the one, that would be the Father, who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. So Jesus did not lie. He is the very symbol of truth. John 14 and verse 6, Jesus said unto him, and that was saying that unto Thomas, by the way, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So let's take this a little bit further, okay? So that there's no doubt in our minds. Well, Jesus decided to go later. So, some suggest that Jesus meant that he would not go to the feast in the manner that his brothers suggested. That is, as a colorful miracle worker. He didn't want to go that way. He didn't want to be involved in something that sometimes turned out to be a circus. So others focus on the last part of the sentence and believe that the sentence means, I do not go up to this feast at this time, that is, with the pilgrims in the caravan, insinuating that he may go later. Okay? So the most common explanation is that the word yet should be part of the sentence, either in the text or implied. So several ancient Greek manuscripts include the word yet in Jesus' word. The NIV has this. It says, I am not yet going up to this feast because for me the right time has not fully come. And we talked about his time. It's got to play out like it's supposed to. And that's what he's talking about. The New King James Version says, for my time is not yet fully come. So Warren Wiersbe, in his commentary, wrote, Jesus was not lying or being evasive. Rather, he was exercising sensible caution. So, verses 51, we're over in Luke 9. Beginning in verse 52. And sent messengers before his face. As they went, they entered the village of the Samaritans to prepare him. But they did not receive him because his face was set on the journey to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did? This sounds like something Peter would come up with, I'm just saying. And matter of fact, we find out that later we find out why they're called the sons of thunder, James and John. But he turned and said to rebuke them, saying, you do not know what manner of spirit you're talking about. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them, and they went to another village. So after Christ's family and others left for the feast, he stayed in Galilee for several more days. So then his disciples left for Jerusalem, not publicly as is in secret. And I think that was kind of the thought here that he talks about over in John 7, verses 9 and 10. So Luke tells of Jesus' trip to Jerusalem. So since the Lord had delayed his departure, he did not take the usual route through Judea, along with the eastern bank of the Jordan River. Instead, he followed the shorter, quicker, less traveled route through Samaria. The Samaritans who had been receptive when the Lord was on his way to Galilee, this is over John 4 in verse 40. Remember, he stayed there with them for a couple of days. Now they refused him lodging when they learned that he was headed for Jerusalem for the feast. Luke 9 and verse 53 says, but they did not receive him because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. They probably considered him going to the temple to worship in Jerusalem was a refusal of the Samaritans' temple. And that was on Mount Gerizim over in John 4 and verse 20. So here John records this event of Jesus with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, where the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where you ought to worship. And that's when James and John, called the sons of thunder, said, hey, look, you want us to send fire from down from heaven like maybe Elijah did to his enemies over in 2 Kings, the first chapter? You see, these words, though not in the better ancient manuscripts, express the thought that must have been in James and John's mind. Could these apostles have called down fire from heaven? I don't know. But I think they thought they could. So if it was in the Lord's will. Of course, if the Lord willed it and asked him to do it, then so be it. But so here is when they get rebuked by Jesus. He says, you do not know the manner of spirit you're speaking of. I'm trying to get you in the right frame of mind, trying to teach you something because I'm going to be leaving, and this is how I want you to handle things. I want you to be calling down fire from heaven. So he had not taught them to destroy their enemies, but to love them and pray for them, over in Matthew 5, verses 44 and 45 in his Sermon on the Mount. So he had previously instructed them that when they were rejected by one city, that they should go to another, in Matthew 10 and verse 23. And that's what they did, according to Luke 9, verse 56. And then they went on to another village. So, Luke and Matthew recording of this event are very similar. When they are the same, we do not know. Roper says, possibly on more than one occasion, Jesus was approached by his would-be disciples who made similar statements, and he responded to each one of them in the same kind of way. Let's read verses 57 through, we need to get in Luke first. 57 through, let's go ahead and read verse all the way down through verse 62, the end of the chapter. Now it happened as they journeyed on the road that someone said to him, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then he said to another, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God. And another also said, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house. But Jesus said to him, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. So, on the way to Jerusalem, Christ encountered some really half-hearted disciples. Knowing his death was near, Jesus did not want them becoming followers and under false pretenses. He knew them that hardship was going ahead. It was just down the road. Only those who were totally devoted with a singleness of purpose would survive with their faith intact. Once a decision was made, there could be no turning back. Jesus asked nothing of these would-be disciples that he did not require of himself. He had put his hand to the plow, according to verse 62. So, here we have three would-be disciples, or candidates, we'll say candidates. It's interesting. We have the impulsive candidate. The first would-be disciple said to Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said two words, like he did to Matthew, the tax collector, who had a lot to, if you remember when we talked about that. The other apostles were fishermen, and they could go back to their fishing boats or whatever, but Matthew, he couldn't go back to his job, okay? I always think of Matthew when I see the word follow me, these two words. See, this man responded to the challenge by saying, I will follow you. He put no restrictions on how far he would go. I will follow you wherever you go. See, it'd be hard to mistake this kind of commitment when someone says these words. In Matthew 8 and verse 19, it says that he was a scribe. And most of the scribes were actually adversaries of Christ, if you'll remember. It would seem that to have someone from the enemy camp to join forces with the disciples would have been exciting. And so when Jesus looked like he can into men and women's, all of our hearts, he saw a man that did not fully grasp the full significance of the words that he was speaking. He apparently saw crowds. He saw the miracles, and he saw the enthusiasm, and he saw the excitement that Jesus brought when he came to someone and did these things. But Christ would have him to see self-denial, sacrifices, and suffering. See, Jesus did not accept nor reject the man's offer. He pointed out that what he could expect if he followed him. Verse 58. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. You see, wild animals and birds have homes to which they can return at the end of the day, but Christ, he had no fixed residence. You see, from time to time, Jesus had houses in which he could sleep at night. Remember Peter's house in Capernaum and Mary and Martha's house in Bethany? See, most of the time, he and his disciples wandered from place to place. A man named Alfred Plummer, I got this from Roper's commentary, said this about Jesus. Jesus' life began in a borrowed stable and ended in a borrowed tomb. And Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 9, he says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich." Jesus was not complaining or asking for pity. He had chosen this lifestyle voluntarily. He had left heaven voluntarily, and he left his home in Nazareth voluntarily. He was not trying to discourage the would-be disciples, but he did want the men to realize what being a disciple really meant. The message to the impulsive disciple was, count the cost. In the parable of the sower in Matthew 13 and verse 18, one of the soil types was the shallow soil, if you remember. And this soil, the plant quickly shot up from the earth, but when the sun came down came up for a period of time, it withered away, and soon the plant came up. As soon as the plant came up, it died. See, Christ said that this represented the man who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet it has no good root in himself, but is only temporary. And when problems arise because of the word, he immediately falls away. Christ did not want this would-be disciple, this impulsive one, to come to that kind of end. And then he talks about the indecisive candidate. This first would-be disciple volunteered spontaneously, if you'll remember, but the second needed encouragement. So when Christ said to them, as he has said to others, "Follow me," when Christ said to me, "Follow me," to men, he was often calling them to full-time service, not part-time. This is going to be full-time now. You need to understand this. So shortly after this, Jesus sent out his 70 disciples on a tour of Judea over in Luke 10 and verse 1. So maybe Christ was recruiting these men for this task. Verse 2 of Luke 10 and verse 2 says, "Then he said to them, remember, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." So the man said, "Lord, permit me to first go and bury my father." So this request sounds reasonable. It's always been a son's obligation to bury his father. And that day, the burial of a parent took precedence over almost any activity. According to the rabbis, it took precedence over religious service or studying the law. A son had a religious, a social, and a family obligation to bury his father. So Jesus had taught that men should honor their fathers, those in Matthew 15, verses 4 through 6, and also in Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. So Christ's response must have come as a shock when he said in verse 60, "Foxes, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God." So Jesus used the word dead here in two ways. Allow the spiritually dead to bury the physical dead. Three verses help us to explain this. First, number one, is Ephesians 2 and verse 1, where Paul writes, "And you he made alive, who were dead in trespasses, and you he made alive. You were buried with him in baptism, and then you arose to walk in newness of life." You were dead in your trespasses. 1 John 3 and verse 14 explains to us and tells us about the imperative of love. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. So this whole context of what I'm talking about this morning is all about loving our brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. And death is a separation. So we must remember that. Is that the first bell? Okay. When they open the doors and start coming in, I'll quit. So on the surface, the Lord's words appeared harsh and unsympathetic and unfeeling. Consider these factors here. So even though the burial took place almost immediately in Bible lands, the same day if possible, as we study, we find this out. The following ceremonies took a week or more. So in any way we look at it, the man was delaying his response to the call of the Lord. So Christ was passing by on his way to Jerusalem. If the man really wanted to follow him, he had to go then because it was getting too late, because Christ knew what was fixing to happen here pretty soon and not later. So when the customs of the day are considered, it was possible that the man was postponing his decision indefinitely. So his request did not necessarily mean that his father had recently died and that he urgently needed to attend the burial of details. His words could have meant, I now have certain family responsibilities. And sometimes later, after my father is dead and my responsibilities have been fulfilled, then I'll follow you. That could have been a possibility. It may have been what he was thinking. The interesting point to this is, and I hope that you caught it when he said, if the man's father had been dead and unburied, the man would not have been standing on the side of the road. I'm just saying, okay. He'd been taking care of business, right, Sam? Been taking business. So, and this, if he'd not been standing there, Jesus wouldn't have said, follow me, but he'd been taking care of his responsibility. So remember that Jesus knew the hearts of men. He could look at their hearts as he can look at our hearts. So however reasonable the man's words may have sounded, Christ did not consider them legitimate reason for not following him, but rather an excuse. The tragic word of the man's first excuse is the word first. Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father. And God has said, you shall love no other gods before me. And this is Exodus 20 and verse 3. And Jesus had said, but seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness. So Christ constantly emphasizing that nothing must take priority over following him, not even love for family. Luke 14, verses 25 through 27. So he called for a radical transference of loyalty. That's basically what he's talking about here. Jesus' message to the indecisive candidate was consider the conflict. So what was he really saying? When a choice must be made between conflicting duties, if you would be my disciple, you must do what I have commanded you to do. What did Jesus command? Allow the dead to bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God. In other words, there will always be those to attend the ordinary tasks of life, such as burial, but I have to ask a special task for you. Go everywhere and proclaiming that the kingdom is now about to be established. The need is urgent, and so follow me now. And I think Joe says stop. I didn't finish. Read further there and with your outline and talk and study about the indecisive candidate.